Welcome to our monthly Tango Alpha Lima Be the One podcast. I'm your host, Amy Forsyth, and I'll be here on the first of each month with guests who provide expertise, resources, and peer-to-peer support as part of the American Legion Be the One initiative to prevent suicide within the veteran community. On the first day of every month, American Legion family members are encouraged to wear Be the One apparel to publicly show their commitment to reducing the stigma around mental health issues. During this episode, we discuss topics that may be troubling for some. If you or a veteran you know is in crisis, call the Veterans Crisis Line at 988 and press 1. Go to betheone.org to learn how you can be the one to save one veteran. Let's get today's conversation started. Hi, everyone. Today, our special guest is Dr. Tiffany Tajiri, CEO and founder of Freedom Rhythm and her nonprofit organization, Energy in Motion. Dr. Tiffany, as she likes to be called, is an Air Force veteran, former Army clinic chief, and the first American woman to publish a faith-based combat recovery book titled Peace After Combat. And she is a mother and a wife to a retired Army combat veteran. Her mission is to inspire people to create a life they love by teaching them how to harness the incredible power of their mind. Welcome, Dr. Tiffany, to the Be the One podcast. Thanks so much for joining us.
Oh my gosh, Amy, it's such a pleasure. Thank you so much for what you do for our community. I am just in awe of you, ma'am.
Oh, well, thank you. It's really a real treat to be able to connect with people like you through the American Legion and this podcast, because you are just shining a light on all the great things that veterans can do and will do. And you yourself are a shining example of such a great success story and really a model for people to look up to. So thank you so much.
I'm so honored. Thank you.
Well, let's get started by telling people, our listeners and our viewers out there, really set the stage for where you grew up and how you ended up joining the Air Force.
Absolutely. So we have a very long family history. My husband and I combined, we have over 200 years of family service to the military. So it's kind of a legacy for us, you could say. So I was born and raised in El Paso, Texas. So I grew up at Fort Bliss. My grandfather, who has since passed away, was in the military for many years and retired at Fort Bliss. And so this is where I was born and raised. And I ended up coming back to my hometown. Now, I joined the military because it's part of the family legacy, but I also wanted to give back. I ended up joining as a clinical psychologist. So I was a doctor when I came into the military, and then I got my license and board certification, had some amazing leadership opportunities, and ended up leaving as a major select for the Air Force. But I loved my time in the military. It has taught me so much discipline and so many incredible values and leadership skills that you wouldn't otherwise learn in any other position in the entire world, is my firm belief.
Wow. Well, so I mean, seen it all, you've heard it all in terms of the work that you're doing and really making a difference on those troops, I'm sure. And then, so you served for how many years in the Air Force on active duty?
So I was 5 years, and then I ended up becoming a civilian, a GS employee, and I ended up running the behavioral health clinic at Fort Bliss. So I was the chief of the West Bliss Behavioral Health Clinic at that time. So I got to understand the operations and the battle rhythm of the Army as well as the Air Force. So it was it was very different, but also very rewarding.
I can imagine switching from the Air Force culture to now where you're a Department of the Army civilian employee. Just as important are federal employees play such a key role in being the glue and the continuity for our troops. And myself as a federal employee until recently, I just think I can't even put into words just how important the role that civilians play in helping the families, especially. And so, having served in that role, and then you transitioned away from that, or are you still working with the Army?
No longer working for the Army, I decided to fly by the seat of my pants and embrace creativity. So it's so funny. So I have these two books here. So here's my first book. It's Peace After Combat. But then here's my second book. If you can see it via video, it's a totally different contrast in color. One is, military colors, an American flag base, and the next one is colorful and vibrant, and it's Born to Create. It's called Neurohacking to Break Free. So my new goal after being with the military for so many years, I appreciate the black and white, I appreciate the leadership and the discipline that comes with it. But now I was like, it's time for me to unleash my creative mind, my artistic mind. Now, being in the military gives you so many opportunities to learn about discipline and to maintain yourself in a certain way, having a particular bearing, a military bearing, so to speak. And sometimes you kind of end up blurring in to the crowd. So now I'm just kind of unleashing myself and allowing my creative art experiences, from dancing to singing to writing, to come full force. And it's been an interesting navigation from leaving the military and stepping in to something that's so new. And entrepreneurship is a new experience for me. So it's always fun to reinvent ourselves and to see the different facets that we're capable of doing, whether it's military or whether it's something creative or artistic like dancing or performing on stage.
I love it because, so many creatives in the military aren't really expressing themselves as they wish until they leave and get away from the military. So you're doing just that. And I'm sure there's tips in there for other people who can use arts and use their creativity to really help with any kind of PTSD or anything that they may be suffering with. What advice would you give people if how the arts and creativeness have helped you or can help other people?
We all have an electromagnetic signature. That's an aura, okay? It's an energy. And that energy is comprised of our thoughts and our emotions, higher vibrations like love and peace, right? We shine brighter when we're doing what we love and what we're passionate about. You can be passionate about the military, right? And the black and white culture that it brings into the perspective. But you can also be passionate about the creative arts, right? And I feel that the more authentic we are, the more we know ourselves and our truth, and the more we're okay to express ourselves, particularly our emotions, the more resilient we become. Now, resilience is a key word in military, especially when we're talking about suicide prevention, right? Because our suicide rates can tend to be so high. When we embrace our authentic self, right, work through some of the problems from our past, when we embrace our creative outlets, things that make us shine bright, things that we want to share, and we do so without fear of repercussions, and we do it in a way that respects everyone around us, we shine brighter. We feel better. We don't feel like we're stuck in a box. We're not feeling like that caged bird. And I feel for so many years being in the military and working for the government, I didn't embrace those artistic sides of me because I was so concerned about what other people would think. When in reality, there's people who are out there on social media doing great things, being creative, and still wearing the uniform. And I think that's so important for us to understand that we have to embrace all parts of ourselves. It doesn't just need to be the militaristic side that we're presenting to the world. It can be all parts of us. So as long as we respect one another and we do it in harmony.
I love that. There's so many great artists out there just waiting to kind of emerge and break free, and so many other great initiatives where military members can showcase their art and expression. But I want to go back to the book called Peace After Combat. Can you describe that journey and that process of what you've included in the book? And the reason why I ask you about that, because there's so few women veterans who are getting out there to tell their story, that I just think it's so important for women veteran voices to get in the mix. There's so many men out there writing books and speaking, but not very many women. So I'd love to hear your take on your book, Peace After Combat.
Absolutely. I was fortunate enough to be an special operations trained psychologist. So I got to work with the selection and assessment of special forces, which gave me a very unique perspective. And of course, I'm always in the room behind closed doors. We're talking about problems. We're processing trauma, oftentimes complex PTSD, whether it's combat related or childhood related, or it's all coming together, right? In an amalgamation, right? That can be overwhelming for people. And so over time, what I have learned is that spirituality was one of the most important factors to suicide prevention. But unfortunately, so many people had lost their faith when they ended up coming back from combat after seeing the atrocities of war. Right. And so my goal in this era of my life, it was many years ago, I figured spirituality is so important. They have to understand that there is a loving God who wants great things for their life, that forgiveness is always at their hands, that they have an abundant life before them and they're not reaping those benefits because for whatever reason, they're keeping themselves locked up in their own mind prison. Right? For whatever trauma they experienced, whatever they did in combat or saw in combat or witnessed, they're keeping themselves in their own prison. And so I thought, well, what's the best way that I can get this message out there? First, people don't understand the psychology behind trauma, right? Trauma is stored in the amygdala, which is the fear center of our brain. And they don't understand that we have to pull that trauma memory to our frontal lobe to dissect it and change the narrative of the trauma. Oftentimes, we see ourselves as the bad guy with the should-haves, the could-haves, the would-haves. And so we take this trauma, and it's almost like the trauma holds a poison. The memory is poisonous to us. So much so it poisons our body from an electromagnetic perspective, right? We are putting the neurochemicals, pushing it from our brain to our body. So what I help them understand is I take that narrative with them and we dissect the narrative. We put God in the good ways because I always tell them God is love. Whoever lives in love lives in God and God in them. And so they understand that God wants the best for them, when they understand that their faith and their spirituality is key to their healing, when they understand that they can't not go through the shoulda, couldas, wouldas, shoulda, had beens, right? That when they understand to process that, they're better able to file that back, that trauma memory, instead of filing into the fear center of their brain, they file it back into their hippocampus, which is their regular long-term memory. But just helping them to break free in a simple language, right? And understanding what PTSD is and giving the hope for their families to potentially read the book so they understand what their partners are going through or their loved ones are going through.
Just a fascinating framework for helping people understand how their brain works, how they respond to things that have happened to them or things that they've seen. And so what a wonderful way to express that. And
Thank you.
so coming from your years of experience and your education and what's been the response from especially in the special operations community in terms of receiving the message that you're putting out there?
You know, the response is that people start to think in a more flexible way. And when we open our mind to recognize that we are creating these narratives in our mind, our trauma narratives, that can be really toxic and deleterious for our overall well-being, when we recognize that we're the creators of the narrative and that we can change the narrative, it's just so much freedom in that. It really frees the person's ability to see different life events from different worldviews and different perspectives to allow them to live life to their fullest, not to be held back, because that quality of life is so important. And a trauma memory and the way it's stored needs to be rewired. And our brain is neuroplastic, so we can do that. So let's enjoy the freedom of our own mind.
Oh, thank you. Dr. Tiffany Tajiri, an Air Force veteran and author, and you also do speaking. But what is your connection to the American Legion and why partnering with the American Legion to help connect the dots? Why is that important to you?
You know, it's so important for us to continue that camaraderie and that fellowship. I love nothing more than to go on a Friday night and see all my friends from the American Legion. They understand you. They speak the same language as you, and we just get it. We're connected. It's just something that you can't explain. It's magical. So I do appreciate the American Legion for being just such a wonderful place to go to have a respite from our everyday life and to connect with people I know and love.
Wonderful. And so what's on the horizon for you? What new projects, what events or initiatives that you're working on?
So right now I actually hold the title of Dr. America 2024. So hopefully Dr. World will be next on the agenda as I do this competition. It'll be very exciting. What else is next? Some TED Talks coming down the pipeline. Very excited about it. Continuing to be creative. My new creative name that I've come up with recently is Dr. Tiffany, the Colorful Psychologist. And I try to make psychology fun-loving for everyone and simple for them to understand, because really it's all about freeing up our mind so that we can live our highest calling. And that's whatever our heart desires, our highest dream.
Well, for someone, our listeners and our viewers out there who are just giving themselves permission to tap into some creative energy, where can they find you and start following you? Because everything you're putting out is just so filled with great energy and love. And I've enjoyed watching, watching you through the past few months, just taking things to the next level. So tell us where people can find you.
Absolutely. You can find me on Instagram, all kinds of social media, Instagram at Dr. Tiffany Tajiri. I also have a website. It's www.freedomrhythm.org. And that website is my business. And in that business, I teach people how to put their emotion, which is energy in motion, into movement, into creative movement to help us process our traumas. Now, you probably well know Dr. Bessel van der Kolk ascertains that the body keeps a score of emotionally painful life experiences. Now, that's not a score we want to keep. So I help people zero that score by using Freedom Rhythm. And that is a protocol that I created to help us process life in general.
Well, you mentioned that book, and I had just come across that book recently. Can you describe how people, if they're not familiar with that concept, how they may not even realize that they're retaining trauma and their body is, but their mind is not connected, and they're not sure how to, like you said, set it free and feel better emotionally and physically.
Well, here's a fun fact. Your brain generates more electrical impulses in one day than all the cell phones in the world combined. What are
Wow.
you doing with all that energy? Are you using it to your benefit, or is it being weaponized against you? Emotion is energy in motion. The electromagnetic chemistry of your thoughts and your emotions impacts every single cell in your body. And you have over 30 trillion cells. So how you think and you feel, the chemistry of your mind. For example, I can imagine myself doing something scary or something bad happening to me. And in that imagination, because your brain does not know the difference between a real versus an imagined experience, while I imagine that, I actually produce the neurochemicals of fear, which are adrenaline, noradrenaline, and cortisol. And when I imagine that, I'm pushing that all throughout my body. So, of course, that's going to have deleterious effects to my physical existence if I keep doing that over time. Now, the average person spends 70% of their life in a state of chronic stress. This triggers the same neurochemicals as fear, like I mentioned earlier, adrenaline, noradrenaline, and cortisol. So if you're always in a state of chronic stress and hypervigilance, you're tearing down your body because those chemicals are floating throughout your bloodstream. Right? Back in the day, I'm going to go a little neuroscience geeky on you, but back in the day, they thought the most important part of a cell, they thought it was the mitochondria, right? The nucleus of the cell. But we're recognizing the most important part of our cells are a cell membrane, because the membrane determines what chemicals come into the cell that will either upregulate or downregulate its genetic output. And so it's very important for us to be mindful of how we're thinking and how we're feeling, because that does produce chemicals within our body.
It's fascinating discussion. So little that we on the outside know about how our body works, but thankfully, people like you who can relate this into easy to understand ways and make it interesting and make it useful information. And really, this podcast and the topics are talking about preventing veteran suicide and some tips, tricks, and ways to prevent the triggers or really, live an enriching life and after combat or other trauma, and to reduce the stigma, to reduce about getting help, reduce veteran suicide. What can you share with us about what you think and what you've observed over the past several years of your service, and then working in that environment with the Army. Very, very critical point for the Army there in Texas.
What's your question? I'm so sorry.
Well, I'm sorry. What are your thoughts on ways to help? What would you tell someone in terms of getting help or reducing stigma about getting help, to reduce the suicide ideation, or, for those people who are on the edge of a
Yeah.
mental health breakdown?
Asking for help means that you're in a vulnerable position, right? And the only way through breakthrough for good things to happen to you is to be vulnerable. And you have to be courageous in order to ask for help and to be vulnerable. Now, here's one thing that would soothe me if I were a service member concerned about asking for help. This is what would soothe my mind. As a clinical psychologist, and I'm sure all the other practitioners out there, we've heard basically every story under the sun. There is nothing you can tell us that will surprise us. No matter how bad you think it is in your own mind that you've escalated it to be, no matter how outrageous it may be, we've heard it all. So there's nothing you're going to do that's going to rattle our world and shake us. So come on in. You got to release some of those thoughts that you're having. You got to release your frustrations and your tension, whatever the circumstance is, whatever feels like a stuck energy in your heart, mind, and body, you need to release it and set it free. Because if you hold on and you continue to be stuck, it's going to cause physical illness over time. I kid you not. We see it time and time again. We've seen so many service members actually get out of the military. They're so used to this adrenaline high that when it stops, they pass away. Right? And we can't have that happening to you because you have to keep everything in your life flowing to include your thoughts and your emotions. But if you're stuck because of a trauma from a past event, or you're stuck on something and your emotions and life is not flowing for you, you need to process it to get it unstuck for your own physical health. Again, we've seen and heard everything under the sun. There's nothing you can do to surprise us. We are excited and thrilled for you to come see us. Seriously.
Well, how do you feel? What's your take on the VA and the way they're treating PTSD or some alternative therapies? How do you feel about that? Some of the psychedelics, experimenting and research going on.
I'm a huge creative. So I'm all about it. I'm all about finding new ways for us to find healing, right? New ways for us to overcome painful life experiences. But I'm a firm believer, and I know for a fact that the hallmark trait of post-traumatic stress disorder is avoidance. You don't want to deal with it. And I can tell you, avoidance over time gets worse and worse. And like I said, it impacts your physical health. So I'm all about new technologies. I'm all about different substances to be used, in a healthy, in the right way, with physicians monitoring you and watching you. I'm all about it. Whatever we can do to set our minds free so that we can have that healing is just going to be better for all of us at large. If it makes you better for yourself, it makes you better for your family. You become a force multiplier once you're healed. So I encourage anyone who is feeling stuck right now, go ask for help. It's the courageous thing to do, seriously. I've asked for help myself personally, and it has changed my life, truly.
Well, you are putting out all the energy and wonderful connections and inspiration for people out there looking for an answer, looking for a pathway forward to connection and creativity. It's truly, truly wonderful to connect with you. So, as we close up, what other message would you like to share with our listeners out there, some veterans or their family members who are in search and in need of some inspiration?
Oh, that's a big question. That's loaded. What do I have for you? I have something for you. Your imagination is the preview to life's coming attractions for the good, the bad, and the ugly. Whatever it is you're doing in life, imagine it great things, because your brain does not know the difference between a real versus an imagined experience. Yet your mind does, but your brain doesn't process it the same way. So whatever you're thinking and believing for yourself in your life, think bigger, think better. You waste your time thinking about worst case scenario all the time, and it's bad for your health. So imagine incredible things, because your imagination is the preview to life's coming attractions.
Dr. Tiffany, thank you so much for joining us,
Of course.
being our special guest today. We definitely want to follow you and pick up all your great energy. Um, and we want to just really appreciate your service and your connection to the American Legion. And thank you, Alphas, for tuning in to the Tango Alpha Lima Be the One podcast. Remember, you can be the one to save one veteran. Find resources and more information and Dr. Tiffany's contacts and social media at betheone.org, and connect with the American Legion on social media to keep the conversation going. Don't forget to subscribe to the Tango Alpha Lima podcast on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you find your podcasts. And please share our podcast with others. And we'll see you on the first of the next month. Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Tiffany.
Thank you all. Have a great day. Have a blessed
Thanks.
one. Thank you for what you do. Appreciate you.
On the first day of every month, American Legion family members are encouraged to wear Be the One apparel to publicly show their commitment to reducing the stigma around mental health issues. Go to betheone.org to learn how you can be the one to save one veteran. If you're a veteran in crisis or concerned about one, call the Veterans Crisis Line at 988 and press 1. You're not alone. The Veterans Crisis Line is here for you, and you don't have to be enrolled in the VA. Help is available, and speak with someone today.